Welcome everyone to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter. I am the Curator of Digital Research Services in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I split my time between the Kislak Center and the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, or SIMS as we call it, and SIMS is all about manuscripts. So we look at digital manuscripts. We have a couple of different collections. And my background is manuscript studies. Actually, I came through digital humanities, but I started out working with manuscripts. And so it's great to be here at Penn, where I get to work with the manuscripts and also do fun digital things. Coffee with a Codex is our weekly show and tell. So I take a book off the shelf and I show it off over Zoom. And I love sharing our manuscripts. And it's also a great way for me to find out more about our collections, because a lot of the things I show are not things that I've really looked at before. And this is one example, although I'm familiar with the text. So let's have a look. So this is the big guy over here. This is MS Codex 906. I shared the link in it should be the first link in the set of links that I sent to you. I also shared the next couple of weeks upcoming and then other kinds of links if you want to have a look. So this big guy is our copy of the Roman de la Rose, which is a sort of really important 14th century poem that has an interesting history of its own. So I want to talk a little bit about the text itself, and then we'll take a look. So it was written in, I'm going to get my dates. My dates are terrible. 13th century. The first bit of it was written by William de Lorius, and it was continued by Jean de Meun. And when I say the first part, it was like the first 4,000 lines or something, like not a whole lot. In our manuscript, I think it's 64. 64 folios, but there's a total of 300 and something folios. So most of it was written by Jean de Meun. And the story is about the lover, and it's an allegory. So the lover has a dream and he goes and he talks to all of these different allegorical characters. The rose is his beloved. And he talks to all these various characters back and forth. Should you go to the beloved or should you not? Should he be chaste? This kind of thing. And the end of it, I remember the end so clearly. I read it when I was in graduate school, and I remember sitting in the library and I laughed so hard because he goes to the tower to get the rose, and he has a staff and he has a bag, and it's like very clearly like allegory for sex. It's just really interesting, but you have to read all of it to sort of get to it. So that's what it's about. This copy was written a lot later. So the text itself was written in the 13th century. This is dated to no later than 1474, or around 1474. So this is a few hundred years later. And the reason that it's been dated to that time is because of the paper. So this is written on paper, and we date it by looking at the watermark. So the way that paper was made, it was made, in small batches locally, and each paper maker would have a metal frame that they would use to make the paper. So you have sort of a slurry of linen and later wood. And it would settle into the frame, and it would take on, if you put, as paper makers did, make a design in the frame, it would take on whatever the design is in the paper. So if you hold the paper up to light, you can see the what's called the watermark. That's what we call it. So if you look at the watermarks for the paper in here, there's paper, dated around the sort of 15th century. And I'll say a little bit more about the paper later, but that's sort of how we date it. And also the script, the writing is a sort of late 15th century script. It's written in French here. So here's where it starts. It's not very decorated. If you look at other manuscripts of this text, you will find much fancier ones. The second link in the set of links that I gave you is to the Roman de la Rose digital library. And we won't be looking at that, but this is interesting. This was sort of a early, oh, sorry, I did not mean to give you that. I was trying to give you something else, hold on. Here we go, the Roman de la Rose digital library. This was a pretty early, it was 2007, 6, 7, 8. This team of scholars who were working on the Roman de la Rose decided that they wanted to digitize all of the Roman de la Rose surviving manuscripts. And in our cataloging archive, which I looked at this morning, I actually found printouts of emails from 2007 when they were asking us to digitize this manuscript. So if you go to there, you'll see this one and also others, and you'll see that comparatively, this one is not so fancy. It has some red initials and some rubrication, but that's sort of the extent of it. You'll notice as I page through that there are also blank spaces before and after the different sections. So the text is divided up into these sort of chapters, these sort of short chapters, and there's spaces between them. And as I page through, the spaces will get, there'll be fewer and fewer of them until finally there aren't any. And we think that these were originally spaces for artwork to be added. So another thing you'll see if you go into that Roman de la Rose digital library is a lot of the manuscripts have illustrations, some of them like really nice, really, really fancy illustrations. And this one doesn't even have any. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that this manuscript, unlike most of the other Romans, there are about 147. There are 147 or 46, I think, that they have tracked down. So it's not an enormous number, but it's not a small number. Like this was a pretty popular text, and it was very, it was widely read. So if you've heard of Christine de Pizan, Christine de Pizan was also writing around the same time that the Roman de la Rose was being written, and she thought it was terrible. So she has writings where she sort of speaks against the Roman de la Rose, and Chaucer also read it, and it was influential for him. Claire says the text is elegant on its own. It does have very nice script. The script is nice. And there's also, I don't know if you can see, maybe I'll see if I can get a little closer. In addition to the red, there's also, we say it's been touched with yellow. So the first letter of each line has a little bit of yellow in there as well. So it's not totally undecorated. There's a little bit of decoration there, which is pretty neat. So here we go. There we go. Down here, another thing you'll see as I page through is this is a catchword. So if you are familiar with the term, a catchword is basically a word that is put sort of in the bottom margin, in the middle, or sometimes on the edge, that is the first word of the next quire. So this helps, if you can see, this is a little bit loose. So you can see that there's a gap. There's this black line here, there's a gap, and you can see the sewing. This is where these quires or gatherings are sewn together. And what this is you're seeing the way the book is made is you've got sheets of paper in this case, and they're folded. In this case, there are 8 sheets that are folded to make quires of 16. So each of these quires, except for 1, 2, has 16 leaves, and then they're sewn together. And to help the binder, the person who is responsible for binding it together, figure out the order in case maybe he drops them and they get out of order, you put a catchword. And that's helpful for us too, because we can see if there are quires missing, which sometimes happens, or they get bound out of order. In this case, it's bound in order. Let's see, there's some numbers that have been added a little bit later. If you look up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the folio numbers. So each folio has been numbered to 16 and 17. And the line numbers have also been numbered. These numbers were added later. I don't think they don't continue very long. It's kind of like somebody started, probably the same person who put the page numbers in or the folio numbers in. He kind of started and then it's like, you know what, this is a lot of work. I don't know if that ever happens to you. Sometimes that happens to me where I'm just like, this is just a lot of work and I'm not going to do it anymore. But it's helpful for the first little bit. And then before I turn again, the last thing I'm going to point out is there are also these numbers down here, which I already pointed out. This is the start of a new choir. And so these are called signature numbers. And it's telling us this is choir B. That's a letter B. So this is the second choir, because this is choir A, B, and then 1, the first leaf in the second choir. So we have 1, 2, I promise it's 3, 4, and then it's the reason that there's not so much there. It's not that he was lazy about writing it. It's because this book has been trimmed. This is actually this is a big book, but it's been trimmed quite a lot. And when we get, I should be turning the pages, as we get along, we'll see that there are places where there were actually things written in the margins that have been completely cut away. So you'll have like half, I hope we'll find some, but we'll see like half of a note here, and it's clear that there was a whole lot more and it's just gone. So this book may have been much, even larger than it is now. And this is pretty big. So what this means is that it's been trimmed. So we're missing some of these signature numbers, and also the catchwords get trimmed away as well. Here's a nice little manicule up here. He's got some yellow in him too. A manicule is just a little pointing finger. And there are these marks up here. I don't know if you've noticed them, probably not, because it's sort of out of the view of the camera. These are wormholes. So a bookworm had a chow down, and there's some at the beginning. There's fewer of them through the middle. So I was mentioning the trimming of the notes on the edge. So here you can see there was something written here. It probably went out at least another inch or so. And it's been cut away, which is too bad. I'd like to know sort of what they said, what could have been said here. Here we are in the middle of a choir, and you can see the thread here that's sewn. So it's sewn up the middle. So you can see how the book is put together. I always point that out because that's what I notice, because I'm really interested in the physicality of these. So you can see in the previous pages, one thing we've lost those numbers, the line numbers, they're gone. And we're not seeing the spaces between the lines anymore, the sort of spaces where we think they were leaving space for illustrations. That's pretty much seeing less of that, although there's another one here. Let's see. Oh, I'm loving these decorations that we get up at the top. I just think those are great. Very 15th century, decoration with a little bit of the yellow in there. They're very nice. So it's not like the earlier, the kinds of things that you would see in like a 15th century book of hours, with a lot of gold or anything like that. But it's still pretty neat. Here's another one there, and here's another note that's been cut away. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So here we are on page or folio 64, recto here. And we're at the start of a new choir. We have a very heavily trimmed patchwork, excuse me, and you probably can't see it, but there is a break. I can see that there's a break here. What happens here that's notable, and the reason that I stuck this in here is because this is where we switch the authors. So William Dolores wrote the first part, and here is where Jean de Meun picks up his bit. And it's been so long since I read this, and maybe there are folks on the call who have read this more recently, but the tone of the two halves is really different. Like William Dolores was sort of more probably conservative, whereas Jean de Meun is clearly having a kind of a fun time with it. So here we are in his section. And we're getting more of these. And this actually looks like there's even more space. Maybe it's just because it's the top of the page. The other thing I wanted to sort of mention is that I was interested to see that this is one of a handful of manuscripts that are included in the Romans à la Rose project that I pointed out. That is written in a single column. So most of them are written in 2 columns, and some of them are written in 3 columns. All right, I'm going to interrupt myself. Joyce is asking, why is the first word on the page the same? So this is, I think you're talking about here. This is Amor. This is the name of the previous page. Let's see. Yes, so I think that this is all Amor. Amor is the lover who is the main character of the story. So I'm not surprised to see that. I think it's just line after line of Amor something something. I don't know. The in the story, the character of Amor goes to he talks to a number of different characters. And so it may be that he's talking to someone, it may be he's talking about himself. Since there aren't line numbers, it's hard to know like what line numbers they are in the text. But I'm pretty sure that is what's happening. Anytime I'm seeing AM, or amorous, I assume that, and I could be wrong, but I assume it's referring to this character. So, let's see. All right. So, and then it happens again. I mean, it just continues here on that page. So let's see. So what I was saying, right. So this is one of a handful that is written in a single column, because mostly it's 2 or 3 columns. And so I got a little bit curious. Oh, I like that decorated initial there. I got a little curious and I looked at the spreadsheet and did a little bit of sort of filtering. And I found the other manuscripts that are written in a single column. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 out of 147 are written in a single column. And they're all later. So this is a 13th century manuscript, or a 13th century text that was immediately very popular. So there are copies from the 13th century, 14th century, a lot of them sort of early to mid 14th century. And then there are some that are a little bit later. And all of the ones written in a single column are a little bit later. And when I say a little bit later, so one of them is 1300, between 1300 and 1350, which isn't later. That's pretty early. But then all of the other ones, 4 of them, so there's 9, 4 of them are 15th century, 2 of them are 16th century, 2 of them are 18th century. So they get late, right? So my theory, which I don't know if anybody's ever said anything about this, but my theory is that the number of single column later manuscripts, that is mostly post printing press, is because they were not copying the text from other manuscripts, which would have had 2 columns, but they were in fact copying from printed copies, which it would have been easier for them to be printed because of the way the printing press works with setting up the print. Would have been a simpler thing, I think, to do it in a single column. And so what I think, and again, if anybody knows different, please say so. But my theory, which I would love to know more about, is that what we're actually seeing in the way that this manuscript is laid out is a sort of interaction between print and written culture, sort of influencing each other. Because this was written in the late 15th century, the printing press would have been around. So anyway, I think that's kind of interesting. So I see that Claire has a question about the stitching. Can we see the spine safely? All right, I will put my note in here and then I will close it up. So the spine is mostly still there. So here's the spine. Probably, so you can see a little bit of where I don't want to pull this too hard because it's already kind of coming apart, but you can see here the other side when I was talking about the stitching, you can see the folded edges of these quires or gatherings. And then here's the thread. Here's how it looks on the other side. So what you do is you have your needle and you push the thread through, and then on the other side, you pull it down and then pull it back up. And so that's what you see when you see the thread going down the center of the spine. It's down the center of the quire. What you're seeing is the other side of this. And then it sort of comes out and you use it to attach each quire to the other one. So that's what's happening. So Marianne asks, is the binding original to the manuscript? So I don't think it's original. The record says that it's contemporary, which means that this is a late 15th century binding. The reason I don't think it's original is because of all the trimming. When I see books that have been trimmed like that, I assume, which is just an assumption on my part, that it was originally in some other binding and that the trimming was done later to make it fit. But in this case, because this is a roughly contemporary and it's really nice. It's got wooden boards. You can see the wood here, and it's got really pretty lined tooling here. So there's been stamps that have been sort of stamped in there. I really like it a lot. And it's been rebacked, which means that the spine has been replaced. So the spine isn't like original or contemporary, but this is. So I'm thinking that that's what's going on. It just means that it was rebound pretty close to the time that it was made, which it could have been. People sometimes some people rebound books when they bought them because they wanted to have all of the books on their shelves looking the same. So it's entirely possible that even if it was purchased with a new binding, whoever bought it had it rebound in their own style. As far as I know, we don't actually know who had it bound the way it is now. We don't actually know a whole lot about who owned this until, let me find that. I was just looking at it. I think it was purchased in, let me find it. So it was part of the Ashburnham collection, and I was just before we started, I was trying to figure out what the Ashburnham collection might have been. I know that there was a collection at the Ashburnham House in England in the 18th century, which is when there was a big fire. But I don't know if, I mean, this clearly hasn't been in a fire, so I don't know if it's related to that Ashburnham at all. But we bought it in 1950 from the Library of J. Thebaud, and I don't know if we know anything about who that is. So we don't know a whole lot about the book's history, except that it was, you know, written in France at some point in the sort of later 15th century. Ooh, look at that. That's pretty neat. So let's see. So we've talked about, we're looking at the text. Other thing is that most of this has been written by a single scribe. So what we've been seeing has all been written by the same person at the same time. Presumably they sort of sat down, you know, and started writing. But if we get way further to the end, right here, and I hope you can see this. So there's a choir. See, we've got a new choir because we've got our catchword here. This choir is written by somebody else, and the paper is different too. If you look at the watermark, you see the paper is different. Just this choir, though, it's similar, but the writing is smaller. It has the same kind of decoration. You've still got the yellow and you've got the red. But it is a different hand. It's clearly different. And so it's this choir, and then this choir ends, and we've got another one, and it looks like the same hand, but it's not the same hand. It's not the same person. It's somebody writing in a very similar script from before. So we've got 3 different people writing, and this is just another choir. So this is just the very last choir of the book. So the last 2 are sort of written by different people, where you could say, if you're thinking about why might this happen, well, maybe the last 2 choirs were damaged, and so these were put in to sort of replace them. The interesting thing is that the paper from these last 2 choirs is actually dated to 20 years earlier than the rest of the paper. So fine, like maybe there was old paper lying around and they used it, but it's just sort of interesting that it's not sort of everything happened at once. It's that things happened at different times, and who knows why. And different piece, you know, the paper is from one time and the writing is maybe from another. And why I don't know. But anyway, it's not a little manuscript. It's a fun, interesting manuscript, and I encourage you all to go look for an English translation of the Roman de la Rose if you can make it through, because it's such a fascinating piece of work, and as I said, like hugely influential. And you can tell because 150 surviving copies, we can imagine that many more don't survive, and it was being copied into the 18th century, which is pretty great. So it is time to go. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope I'll see you again next week. I'll be doing the manuscript that I missed last week because I was sick. So we are going to be doing Esther, and we'll be doing more and more. And it's always great to see you guys. So have a good week. you.